Hello again, Year 10. I hope you've managed to have a really good and hopefully a good rest over the Easter break and are ready, raring to go and crack on with your history lessons from this week. Now, this morning, the lesson is going to come in two parts. The first bit is going to be a recap of a lot of the stuff you've done so far. The second part, the last 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to teach you a little bit of something new before we crack on with the rest of the topic from later this week. Also later this week, we're going to do the feedback from the 16-mark questions you did before Easter. So keep an eye out on Google Classroom because your teachers will be reading through those this week and giving you feedback through Google Classroom. Now, to do your work today, there's a few different ways you can do it. If you'd like, if you've got access to a computer and it's easy to type it in, then you can do your work today directly into the box. Everything you see that is in grey in that Google Sheets document is an area where you can type your answers directly into the work. As well, later on in the lesson, you'll see there's lots of areas in grey for you to take notes during today's lesson. If you don't have access to a computer, then you can simply do your work on a pen. You can do your work using a pen and paper. Just take your notes and then at the end of this, take a picture of it on your phone and submit it to Google Classroom just like you were before Easter. You can complete this lesson in whatever way is easiest for you, in whichever way means you can make your notes as thorough and detailed as possible. So, let's make a start. As always, we're going to start the lesson with a quiz. So can you please pause the video now and take 2 minutes to complete the quiz, either directly in the Word document or on your piece of paper. Pause the video and do the quiz now. Brilliant, let's go through the answers. Now, if you're doing this on paper, try and change colour pen as you self-correct your own answers. If you're doing it directly into the Google Sheets document, change the font colour to green, and again, self-check and correct your answers. So number 1, the answer was Coldbeck Hill. 2 is he disbanded the Fyrd. Now 3 is the Battle of Gate Fulford first, then the Battle of Stamford Bridge second. 4 is Jimmy Carter. 5 is 1979. 6 was the Moscow Olympic boycott of 1980, followed by the Los Angeles Olympics boycott of 1984. 7 is a flagellant. 8 were buboes. 9 was 1348. 10 was the 1924 Dawes Plan. 11 was Gustav Stresemann. And 12 was the Locarno Pact of 1925. Please make sure you have fully filled in any gaps from the starter quiz. Now, the lesson we're looking at today, the inquiry question we're going to be answering, is how did William, Duke of Normandy, become King William I of England? Now, you know quite a lot about this already, so to start the lesson off with your what do you already know, directly into the Word document if you're doing it, or on your piece of paper. Again, you've got a grey section here just after step 3. Can you write everything you already know about that main question? What events happened that allowed him to become King William I? What people or characters were involved helping Duke William of Normandy become King William I of England? Think back to everything you've done in your history lessons over the past 1 or 2 months. Pause the video now and empty your head about what you already know about this question. Pause the video now. Excellent. Now that's a really important step, especially after a 2-week Easter break, because when you try and recall everything in your memory, then that strengthens those memories for the long term. And like I said, that's especially important after a long break like we've just had over Easter. Now, in order for us to answer this question today, we're going to take two really straightforward steps. First, we're going to recap the story so far. We're going to take a look at the things you already know about the story and about William, Duke of Normandy, becoming the King of England. Then, once we've recapped and recalled in a few different ways, I'm going to tell you the story of William's coronation and how he actually got the crown of England. Now, in order to recap the story so far, I would like you to first work your memory about everything you can remember. So again, if you look at the Google Sheets document, you'll see from step 4, you've got these images here. So you've got box A, box B, box C, box D, and box E. Now those images tell you the story of what you've learned so far. They're there as prompts to spark your memory and help you remember what you can. So what I want you to do now is look at these images, and in the grey box next to them, I'd like you to type everything you can remember about those images. So in here you type everything you know about this image, who could this man be, who was helping him, what happened to that man in 1066. Now all these images are in order, and a lot of them are images you've seen before. Now it's really important, as we were saying earlier, that first we recall as much as we can completely from memory. So what I would like you to do now is pause the video. I'd like you to look at all of those images, and I'd like you in full sentences and in as much detail as possible, write everything you can remember about the story so far. Pause the video now and empty your head. Fantastic. Now that you've emptied your head, I'm not going to give you all of the answers straight away. What I'm going to do is give you some prompts and some pointers to try and help you spark some of those memories back to life. So if you take a look at your screen now, what you will see in a moment, if it loads, there you go. Now what you'll see here on the screen are a list of keywords and prompts that are going to help you to remember this information. Sorry, I need to fit them all on the screen. There you go, thanks for your patience there. Now what you'll see on the screen now is that list of prompts and those reminders that are going to help you to remember what's going on in those images. So I would now like you to change your font colour to light green, and I'd like you to look back at those images and try and add as much as you can using these keywords as sparks and prompts. Pause the video now, look at each of those words carefully and add anything that you've missed in light green to the images you've just been looking at. Pause the video now. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for doing that. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to retell you the story, the very light, not very detailed overview of the things you've learned. It's really important that we recap it and fill in these gaps because the story that you'll be learning about in your next lesson will pick up directly from what you've just covered. Okay? So, as I'm talking to you now, as I'm kind of retelling you this information, I'd like you to change your font colour to a dark green and now add even more information to those grey boxes as we go. This is the third layer with the most support because I'm just going to tell you the answers. So if you're doing it in the Google Sheets document, dark green, type it straight in. If you're doing it on paper, can you change colour again? And now add anything that you've missed. Right, so let's start at the first image in A. Now A is an image of King Edward the Confessor. Now, King Edward the Confessor was a very pious and religious man. That's where his name comes from. He was a very strong Christian. And because of his pious nature and his strong belief in Christianity, he was also quite a peaceful king. He was not one of these kings who was a strong military leader. And because he wasn't a strong, tough king, the way he controlled England was through appearing like the legitimate king, by trying to be a good king that people would want to follow and people would want to be loyal to. But he also secured his position as king by getting help. And he got most of his help from his right-hand man, his sub-Regulus, Harald Godwinson, the Earl of Wessex. Now, the role of sub-Regulus is like the king's main assistant, his main advisor. Now, Harald Godwinson had a lot of experience because he'd been the Earl of Wessex, just like his father. Harald Godwinson's family also controlled much of England because 3 of his brothers were also earls of other earldoms. And in fact, the Godwinson family also had a family connection to Edward the Confessor, because Harald Godwinson's sister, Edith of Wessex, was married to the king. All of this meant that Harald Godwinson had a close relationship as brother-in-law to Edward the Confessor, but they were also strong colleagues. They worked together very, very closely and had a very, very trusting working relationship. All of this made Harald Godwinson a very experienced leader of England. Somebody who had led the feud, he'd led the military, and he'd helped the king to rule the country. Now, on the 5th of January 1066, Edward the Confessor died. And this created a lot of problems because Edward the Confessor died without having any children. This meant it was difficult for the Witan, in theory, to choose the next king because there was no direct heir to the throne. And this created what is referred to as a succession crisis. Now, if you take a look at section B, I'm going to recap section B for you. Now, during the succession crisis, there were 4 contenders to the throne. There were 4 people who thought they should be the next king of England. Contender number 1 was William, Duke of Normandy. Now, William, Duke of Normandy was an experienced leader because, as his name suggests, he was a Duke of Normandy, a small state in what is today part of France. And he thought he had a legitimate claim to the English throne because of the embassy to Normandy, a trip where Edward the Confessor had sent his sub-Regulus Harold to Normandy to give a message to William. According to William, that message was that William should be the next king of England. According to William, Edward and William had a good relationship, and Edward the Confessor wanted him to follow as king. The second contender to the throne, after the death of Edward the Confessor in 1066, number 2, is Harald Hardrada. Now, Harald Hardrada was a fierce Viking king. He thought he should be king because of old treaties signed by King Canute, a former Viking king of England. And he thought King Canute's treaties gave Harald Hardrada himself, as the Viking king, a legitimate claim to the English throne. Now, Harald Hardrada's claim to the throne would have been strengthened by the Danelaw part of England. The Danelaw part of England was a part of England where many people there wanted a Viking king. They spoke Scandinavian languages and in many cases followed Viking laws. So it was very, very clear that if Harald Hardrada launched an attack on England, he would get a lot of support from those parts of England. Contender number 3 was the man we were talking about, Harald Godwinson. Now, he was an Anglo-Saxon, he was an Englishman, giving him an advantage to be the next king of England. As we mentioned, he was very, very experienced. He did have a family connection to the king through his sister Edith of Wessex. And because of journeys like the embassy to Normandy, Harald Godwinson had been shown that he was trusted by Edward the Confessor. The final contender to the throne, number 4, is Edgar the Atheling. Now, Edgar the Atheling was the nephew of Harald Godwinson. This meant he was a nephew of Edward the Confessor. This meant that he had royal blood. It meant that he had a really strong family connection to the old king, Edward the Confessor. However, Edgar the Atheling's claim to the throne was weakened by the fact that he was an inexperienced teenager. The Witan didn't really want Edgar the Atheling in at the start of 1066 to be king because they didn't think he had what it took to be a strong leader of England. Now, these were the 4 main contenders to the throne after the death of Edward the Confessor, and the story you were learning about before Easter is how these 4 men competed to try and become King of England. Now, right after, as we move on to section C, right after Edward the Confessor's death, the Witan acted very, very quickly. And the same day that King Edward the Confessor was buried, Harald Godwinson was coronated, and Harald Godwinson was made the new King of England. The Witan chose him because they trusted him, he was experienced, he had the support of other Earls, and he had that family connection as brother-in-law to the old king. Now, when William of Normandy heard this news in Normandy, he was furious. He thought he should be the next King of England because of the embassy to Normandy, but he couldn't do anything about it at first. And the reason why William, Duke of Normandy, couldn't do anything about it is because the winds were going in the wrong direction. The winds were blowing from north to south, meaning he was unable to cross the channel. So he had to wait in Normandy, where he prepared his army, waiting for the winds to change. But because the winds were blowing from north to south, that gave the Vikings an advantage. It meant they could sail very easily and attack England, which is exactly what they did as we move to image D. Now, what the Vikings did, and the images for this are shown in the first battle, is they sailed first up the Humber River in the north of England, and then they prepared their men on the edge of a beck in a shield wall. Now, what Harald Hardrada did is he put his Viking army in that shield wall along the beck. He then put his ally Tostig Godwinson in charge of those men. Harald Hardrada, that fierce Viking king, then took his best men and hid them behind a hill which couldn't be seen. The Anglo-Saxon army for this battle was led by Edwin and Morcar, 2 northern Anglo-Saxon earls. The army was not led by King Harald Godwinson because he was in the south of England. The English also arranged their men in a shield wall to the north of the beck. Now, when the tide went out and the water left that beck, it was the start of the Battle of Gate Fulford. The fighting started between the Tostig Godwinson's Vikings and Edwin and Morcar's Vikings, fighting over that beck. This was where then Harald Hardrada used those men to get the element of surprise. Harald Godwinson led his men around the back of the Anglo-Saxon shield wall, and Harald Hardrada and his men were able to quite easily defeat the Anglo-Saxons. And there are stories that many of the Anglo-Saxon soldiers were killed there, and their bodies were left to collapse in the beck, and the Vikings actually walked over the Anglo-Saxon dead bodies. Now, the Vikings had that huge success at the Battle of Gate Fulford. They then marched north to York, where they were waiting for the delivery of hostages. Now, while they were waiting for delivery of hostages, which would have got them the loyalty of the people around them, King Harald Godwinson marched north to fight the Vikings. Harald Godwinson thought this is a point where he has to take it into his own hands, and he took the Feigned and marched the hundreds of kilometres to York. He then met, before any battle, with Harald Hardrada and his brother Tostig Godwinson. He offered Tostig Godwinson the option to return to his side, to the Anglo-Saxons, but Tostig refused because King Harold wouldn't do anything for Harald Hardrada. This was then the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the second time the Vikings fought the Anglo-Saxons. Now, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the Vikings were defeated because the English had managed to get the element of surprise. Tostig Godwinson was killed, Harald Hardrada was killed as well. The Vikings who survived that battle went back to their ships and returned to Scandinavia. Now this showed that Harald Godwinson had defeated his first contender to the throne, but unfortunately for Harald Godwinson, at the same time as this, the winds changed direction. And because the winds changed direction, William, Duke of Normandy, was able to cross the Channel and land in the south of England. Now, what William did is he landed in the south of England and started to destroy much of Wessex, Harald Godwinson's former earldom. And he did this because William had taken cover in the walls of London, a strongly fortified area that should be really difficult to attack. And by committing those atrocities in Wessex, by destroying farms and buildings, William, Duke of Normandy, hoped to try and tempt King Harold to leave London and fight him in the open. And this strategy worked. William took his army away from London. He marched to William to meet him in Hastings, which leads us to the Battle 3, the Battle of Hastings. Now in this battle, William, Duke of Normandy, had a strong cavalry. These were well-trained knights on horseback, giving them a height advantage and a speed advantage. But despite William's strong cavalry, the first advantage went to the Anglo-Saxons and King Harald Godwinson. And that advantage was a strong position. The Anglo-Saxons were able to put their army on the top of Caldbeck Hill. And that's where the Anglo-Saxons organised their shield wall. Now, it was important for the Anglo-Saxons that they got this height advantage because it meant that the cavalry, the Norman cavalry, were not as effective because they couldn't sprint or charge uphill. And it meant that advantage that they would normally have failed. To make matters worse for the Normans, then a rumour went around the Norman army that their king, or their duke, William of Normandy, had been killed. And it was at this point of the battle where William, Duke of Normandy, removed his helmet to inspire his men and show he was still alive. It was then that he decided to use the feigned retreat strategy. And this is where the cavalry were really able to help the Normans. The feigned retreat was when the cavalry pretended to run away. They pretended they'd been defeated. And when they ran away, the Anglo-Saxon shield wall started to chase them. They started to chase them and the shield wall started to break up. And the cavalry, using the speed of the horseback, turned around and attacked the gaps in the Anglo-Saxon shield wall. And this was where the turning point of the battle took place. Because this was where the Anglo-Saxons started to be overrun, their shield wall failed, and King Harald Godwinson was killed. Now that's everything you learned up to. It's not in as much depth and detail as you did before Easter, but hopefully you found it a useful 10 or 15 minute recap of the story so far. Now the rest of today's lesson, I'm going to tell you the next part of the story. It's not too long, but it's just looking at the events of William's coronation. Because just because William has killed the former King of England, Harald Godwinson, it doesn't mean yet he's the king. Because you might remember there is one contender left. Now, as I kind of lecture and talk you through this next part of the story, what I would like you to do is, if you're doing it in the Google Sheets document, can you please scroll down to step 5? As I'm lecturing you through the next part of the story, can you fill it in those grey boxes? If you're doing it on paper, or if you've printed this off yourself, again, do it on paper, take notes in as much depth and detail as you can, because you're going to take a photograph of them at the end to show your teacher your great work. Okay, so, right after the Battle of Hastings, the Anglo-Saxon king has been killed. William thinks all of the aristocracy, all of the Earls of England are going to come to Hastings to meet him. William thinks they will come to him, they will surrender, and they will make him the new King of England. But William was wrong. None of the aristocracy came to Hastings to surrender to him. In fact, much of the aristocracy were meeting as part of the Witan in London. Now, the Witan was made up at this point of Edwin and Morcar, those two northern earls, and you can see a drawing of Edwin and Morcar here. The Witan was also made up at this point of religious leaders. For example, Archbishop Feigned, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Archbishop Ealdred, the Archbishop of York, were part of the Witan as well. And these were the important religious leaders of the church in England. Now, they met as part of the Witan in London, and in fact, rather than picking William, Duke of Normandy as the next King of England, they chose Edgar the Atheling. He was very much their second choice of king, and he was appointed King Edgar in 1066 after that Battle of Hastings. As you can imagine, when news of this reached William, he was furious because he thought he should rightly be the next king. So William starts taking new steps to secure the English throne. And what he does is he doesn't march directly for London. What he does is he takes this indirect route along this red line. And the reason why he first marches to Dover is he wants to secure the south coast here. And by securing the south coast, he will make sure he's got that strong connection to the Channel so he can easily get more reinforcements from Normandy. He wants to keep those supply routes open to his home in Normandy. Once he secures the south coast, he then marches west towards Winchester. Now, Winchester's really important because it's where the English royal treasury was kept. Basically, it's where the gold and wealth and money of England were securely controlled. And by marching there, William was able to send his men to seize the royal treasury. He basically managed to steal all of England's wealth, which would really, really weaken Edgar and the Witan and the Anglo-Saxon aristocrats, because essentially William has their gold now. Now, as William and his men march along that red line, they commit more and more atrocities. And in fact, they commit so many atrocities, they destroy more farmland, more homes, kill more Anglo-Saxon people to make the Anglo-Saxons even more frightened of him. And because of that, they become more and more intimidated. And what the Anglo-Saxons start doing when they see the Normans arrive in their village is they start leaving their homes and surrendering without a fight. They start, bit by bit, to pledge their loyalty to William rather than Edgar because of that intimidation and fear. And fear is a really key thing I want you to remember when you think about how William controls England, because over the next few weeks, more and more and more, he uses that fear to get loyalty. Now, as you can see from the red line, he doesn't march straight to London. He marches past London and then swings round from the north. And the reason why he's trying to surround London is because he knows the Witan and King Edgar in London will be safe behind the walls of London. As we mentioned, London was really strongly fortified, so William wanted to surround it and cut them off from the rest of England because he knows a direct attack will be very, very difficult. However, as he sweeps round from the north of England, he reaches the town of Berkhamsted, and he is met by the Witan and by Edgar. And it's quite clear at this point that Edgar and the Witan have got no chance. They're going to be cut off from the rest of England. They're not going to be able to defeat William, so they decide to submit. They decide to surrender. And what happens is Edgar the Atheling and other members of the Witan, including Edwin and Morcar, they meet William and his army at Berkhamsted, and they decide to give William the crown. They submit. They all swear an oath to obey William. They say he's the new rightful king. They give William the hostages to prove they'll be loyal, and they give him the crown. In return of receiving the crown, William promises to be a gracious lord. And effectively, he's promising to be a good, honest, and fair king. He says he's not going to be cruel. Now that he's king, he's going to be a good king to help England recover. And that event is known as the submission of the Earls at Berkhamsted. The event where they give the crown and they surrender. Brilliant. So that's all the information you need to answer our inquiry question today. How did William, Duke of Normandy, become King William I of England? Now, just to finally get your ideas and the knowledge down of that question, if you look at the end of the document on Google Sheets, you'll see there are 4 questions in step 6 that I would like you to answer. Now, your answers need to be in full, formal, detailed sentences. I want you to push yourself for 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences to answer each question in as much detail as possible. Answer them directly in the grey boxes if you're doing it in the document or on paper, and then make sure you take a good clear picture. Now, step 6 is the final step that you have to do in this lesson, but if you've got time and you want to develop your understanding even further, step 7, there are some stretch activities where there are 2 extended readings for you to do, where you can add new information about what you've learned in that box there. If you click on those links, what you will see is a photocopy of 2 chapters from 2 books, which do a really good job of giving you even more information about these 2 events. So there's this one here which gives you more information about the Battle of Hastings. And then there's this one here which gives you even more information about the submission of the Earls at Berkhamsted. So what you can do is you can read through these chapters. If you've got a printer or a tablet, maybe take them out and read them in the garden if it's a nice day. But you can read through them and take more notes in this box here or on paper to submit. Brilliant. Now that you've done that work, can you remember to click Hand In on Google Classroom so that your teacher can see the great work you've been doing? Then look out later in this week for your next lesson. Your next lesson will be looking at what William does now that he is king to keep control of the country closely. Your next lesson will also include some feedback for the 16-mark question you did before Easter. So you'll be able to do your green for growth on that 16-mark question that was submitted. As always, if you've got any question, don't hesitate to email your teacher directly and they will do what they can to answer any questions or solve any problems. Keep looking after yourself. Keep remembering to get some fresh air if you've got access to a garden or go take a walk. I look forward to hopefully seeing you again soon. Well done for getting your history work done in these unusual circumstances, and keep looking after yourself. Thanks. See you soon.